Howdy everyone, big deviation from my normal content, I hope you don't mind. I wanted to share with you how I created the animated intro in this video. I wanted to share my entire process from designing the character in the intro, rigging him, and then animating him. This is not really a tutorial. I'll throw up the tutorial on screen that I followed and I'll link it in the description if you want to give it a try yourself. This is an animation journal I can look back on and revisit my entire process from designing to animating. So the design, what is this thing? This is Rigsby Rabbit, or that's just what I've been calling this thing. He's a cat, rabbit, dog creature. Really, it's just a cuddly animal companion. I really like these friendly sidekick-esque creatures that they look like they want to be your friend, you know? Those designs greatly appeal to me as an animal lover, so I made the cutest combination of my three favorite animals, a rabbit, a dog, and a cat. I was tempted to do another bipedal design, but I have one I'm making in Toon Boom Harmony, and that thing is a beast of a rig. So I really just wanted to design something a little simpler, a little bit closer to my comfort level, since I've never rigged anything in Adobe Animate. I've frame by frame animated in Adobe for a very long time, but I've never actually rigged anything in there. Most of my rigging, per se, I do in editing softwares, so this is a new experience for me. So let me just talk about some of the footage you're watching on the screen right now. The first thing I did was I sketched out a rough idea of what I wanted to do in Procreate, and then brought that sketch into Adobe Animate and started breaking everything up into pieces that I could manipulate to create animations. I wasn't quite sure how many articulation points I wanted this rig to have, and when I started designing this character, I didn't even know what I wanted him to be doing on the screen. I didn't really figure out exactly what I wanted to do until about halfway through breaking him up into different pieces in Adobe Animate. A couple things I want to note is, first, you really should keep track of every single layer that you have. Name everything the minute you create it. There's nothing more frustrating than looking for a piece that you can't find under layer 34. My rig in particular had a lot of different parts and the timeline got super big. I ended up even docking it to the side instead of at the bottom because I had so many vertical layers to keep track of. I didn't want to put it at the bottom. And then when I start animating this thing, I just undock it from the screen altogether and put it on my second screen so I didn't have to look at it. Another thing I want to note, because I'm seeing it pop up on the screen as I'm watching my footage, is when you're converting your drawings to symbols, there's an option to change movie clip to graphic. I didn't do this at first, and it wasn't a super big hassle to go back and change it, but just make sure you click that little box and put it to graphic instead. Also, your naming conventions should not confuse you. For me, I spent a lot of time frustrating myself with the parenting process because I had naming conventions that really baffled and frustrated me. For things like the legs, I named them one letter for each attribute, so the back right upper leg was BRU leg. And this just made me super frustrated when I was going through the parenting process. Just don't do that. Just name things that make sense to you. So I forgot to hit record on the parenting process, but not to worry. I did it 2 more times because Adobe kept crashing. We'll get to that. But at this point, I was really unhappy with how the character was articulated and how it was cut. You couldn't move the head too far without the weird jagged cut line of the neck. So I went back to the drawing file and edited a bunch of the pieces so they had a little bit more flexibility, and you could push them further. Another quirk of Adobe was I was struggling with this little bit right here. I don't know why, but sometimes when you delete certain vector points on a pencil line, it just completely deletes everything else. I don't know why it does this. If anyone knows, I would love to hear about it, because this isn't something I really encountered in this animation specifically, but when I frame by frame animate and I'm cleaning up my lines to have smoother vector points, it's really frustrating when I start deleting massive swaths of color. So as I'm finishing up fixing all these pieces for my rig, I start to do the parenting process. And I'm actually going to undo some of my work later on because I promised to use the bone tool for the legs specifically, but you can access the parenting tool by going up to these three little boxes and clicking on that. The whole process is pretty intuitive. It's not super hard. The thing I want to talk about is how during the parenting process, I had Adobe crash on me quite consistently, and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. It just, every time I got to the parenting process, it would crash on me after doing it for a couple of minutes. I finally figured out, like, the fourth time it crashed on me, that changing the parent was the thing that was crashing it. You know, you gotta love Adobe. It's got a lot of quirks, and it is a labor of love to learn this program. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, and everybody can tell me in the comments how wrong I am about all of it. This is the final time I go through and rig this character, and this time I finally add the bones. But before I get to the bones, I just wanted to quickly go over how parent-child rigging works. So essentially, child pieces will follow the parent pieces. So you have the head of the character, for instance, and you want the ears to follow the head when you move the head. So you'd parent the ears to the head. So the ear is the child and the head is the parent. And every time you move the head, you move the ears automatically with the head. And then the head connects to the neck, so you would parent the head to the neck and the neck to the chest and so on and so forth. The other thing that I did was use the bone tool. I really don't want to talk about how the bone tool works because I was having a really hard time with it, but essentially it makes it so when you drag the end of the chain, the rest of it will follow with it. I don't super love this method, but I promised to have it in my assignment, so here it is. I put it on the legs. Pretty late into this assignment, I decided I wanted this character to sit down and tap the ground to make the rest of the logo appear. Really cute idea. I didn't know how to make this standing character sit down in a way that didn't make it look super clunky and awkward, so I redrew the character sitting down and rigged only one of the legs. And the way I chose to rig it was I drew 3 poses and used the frame picker in Adobe Animate to pick the pose that I wanted and add a little squash and stretch to sell the movement. I think this was the right choice. I wanted to experiment with the frame picker for the eyes and the mouth shapes already because I wanted this character to blink. So I had to learn this process anyways, so I thought, okay, well, we'll just make our lives a lot easier, and we'll use the frame picker for this little tapping animation on the ground as well. So one more thing I want to go over before I get into talking about the animation part of this is harmony. And I know I'm animating in Animate right now, and harmony's not even really like a part of this discussion. I just wanted to share some insight because I've been learning how to 2D rig in Harmony this semester, and Animate is something I chose to take on by myself. I personally would have started with this program. It's a lot simpler to do, and Harmony is a great and powerful software. I love it. I can do so many cool things with Harmony. However, Harmony's node view in their premium subscription is scary. Opening that thing up for the first time was terrifying. And I feel Adobe Animate is a lot easier to understand. The barrier to entry is much lower, and you can still do very impressive things with this program. This video is super not about Harmony, I just wanted to mention it here. Okay, I'm done yapping about Toon Boom. Let's get back into the animation. So while I was animating this puppet, I had to do a lot of tweaking of the anchor points, of the bone tool, of the drawings themselves. It was very trial and error almost the entire time I was animating, and I got a little frustrated during a couple parts of this animation, and I think you can really see it in, or perhaps not because this footage is so sped up, but there's a couple of points that I have to go back and reanimate something because I didn't set a keyframe properly, or I forgot to, or just a lot of things were not really going my way the first time I really sat down and tried to do this. So I took a break. I took a nice bike ride that didn't make me really feel all that much better. And then I came back and I sat down and I tried to do this yet again. And the thing that I learned is the type of tween that you're using really affects your quality of life in Adobe Animate. So when I used to tween in Adobe Animate, I always used the motion tweens. And you know, I think those are really good in certain instances, but for whatever reason, motion tween and the frame picker were fighting constantly, and they just did not jive well. The synergy was terrible between those two functions. So I went back, started using classic tweens, which is not something I normally use. I really like how it shows you all of the little points when you highlight the path. But the classic tweens were really working with me, and it finally made the frame picker work. I don't know if I just had a setting clicked weird, or if it just doesn't work with the classic tweens, but that took me probably too long to figure out. At the end of the day, I actually deleted a lot of the footage that I recorded for this video because I just was animating and reanimating for so long. It just felt redundant to keep putting this in. But I finally finished, and now we're on to editing. I edit in HitFilm Express, which is not really the industry standard by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to limit as many hassles from Adobe as I could, and I have found that Adobe Premiere Pro and After Effects consistently crashes on my laptop, which is the thing I'm editing this on. So I just opened up HitFilm and it went fine. Not really much to say. I tweened a couple graphics in an editing program to sync up with the animation that I made and added a few sound effects, and I was done. I really like how this came out, and I hope you found this entertaining.